Start this walk at Embankment Underground Station. Turn left after exiting the ticket barriers and exit the station. Continue directly along Villiers Street and stop outside number 43 Villiers Street, which is on the right just after Victoria Embankment Gardens. This building was Rudyard Kipling's house, a yellow building called Kipling House. Kipling lived here on the third floor between 1889 and 1891. Here he wrote the partly autobiographical novel The Light That Failed in 1891, in which Dick Heldar takes some rooms overlooking the River Thames near Charing Cross. Kipling will be most remembered for writing The Jungle Book in 1894 and Kim in 1896. He was awarded the Nobel Prize for Literature in 1907. Continue along Villiers Street on the left and turn first left into a pedestrianized underground walkway called The Arches. Continue along to the very end and stop at the steps. Notice that on the left, the Players Theatre, the only venue for traditional music hall entertainment in the West End. In Dickens' time, this area was the site of Hungerford Stairs and Warren's blacking warehouse. Dickens' family was so in debt with his father in Marshalsea prison that Dickens, aged 12, was forced to work here in a shoe blacking factory. To alleviate the boredom, Dickens began to create stories to entertain workmates, one of whom was called Bob Fagin. Dickens' experiences of working here were so terrible that he refused to reveal them to anyone other than his biographer, John Forster. Later, these vivid experiences were used in the semi-autobiographical David Copperfield, in which his hero is found working here as a laborer under the services of Messrs. Murdstone and Grinby, a crazy, tumble-down old house abutting the river and literally overrun with rats. Return to Villiers Street and turn left. Turn first right into John Adams Street and continue. Turn first right into Buckingham Street and continue to the set of steps at the end. A young Dickens lived at number 15, which was the end house immediately on the left, now demolished. When Dickens lived here, the River Thames nearly came out to the steps at the foot of his street. Dickens lived at the very top of the house in 2 attic rooms. The house would have looked identical to the one next door. David Copperfield lodged here with Mrs. Krupp. They were at the top of the house. It consisted of a little blind entry where you could hardly see anything at all, a sitting room and a bedroom. The furniture was rather faded, but quite good enough for me, and sure enough the river was outside the window. Return along Buckingham Street to John Adams Street. Turn right and continue. Turn first left into an alley called George Court, which leads to the Strand. Cross the Strand using the traffic lights and turn right when on the other side. Turn first left into Bedford Street and continue. Turn first right into Maiden Lane, and on the left at number 35 is the historic Rule's Restaurant. Rule's Restaurant was established on this spot in 1798, and it's London's oldest restaurant, famous for its porter, pies, and oysters. Dickens was a regular customer at Rule's. There's even a special Dickens room, which can seat 16 people and is filled with Dickens memorabilia, some of which, for example, playbills from his productions, he himself brought here. Included amongst the many other famous customers of this restaurant are H.G. Wells, Laurence Olivier, Clark Gable, and Charlie Chaplin. Edward VII, then the Prince of Wales, and his mistress, Lily Langtry, dined here so often that a secret door was made for the couple so they could enter unobserved. Let's move on. Continue down Maiden Lane until we get to Southampton Street and cross the road. Turn left and then immediately make a right into Tavistock Street. Continue along on the left, and just near the rear of the Jubilee Market, turn left into a passage called Tavistock Court, which will lead us into Covent Garden. Let's stop outside the London Transport Museum, which is on the right. You're now standing in Covent Garden. This was one of Dickens's favorite childhood places in London. In Oliver Twist, Bill Sikes remarks,
50 boy thieves could be obtained every night in Covent Garden.
Job Trotter spends the night in a vegetable basket here the night before Pickwick's release in the Pickwick Papers. So let's continue on. Let's go on the right past the London Transport Museum and turn on the first right into Russell Street. Continue to the junction with Bow Street. Cross the road and let's turn left, and shortly on the right is the Bow Street Magistrates Court, which is a police station today and is opposite the Royal Opera House. Bow Street Magistrates Court was the home to the Bow Street Runners, London's first regular police force. The Magistrates Court is where the Artful Dodger was held after stealing a handkerchief from a gentleman's pocket in Oliver Twist. Barnaby Rudge is questioned here after his arrest in the Gordon riots. In 1885, Oscar Wilde was charged here with gross indecency and held in a cell in which he was afforded the luxury of a rug. On waking, after a terrible night's sleep, Wilde ordered breakfast from the nearby Tavistock Hotel. His tea, toast, and eggs were brought to his cell by a waiter. In 1915, D.H. Lawrence's The Rainbow was judged to be obscene in this court. Let's turn and go back down Bow Street, which will turn into Wellington Street. Keep on the left. Stop at the corner of Tavistock Street. This is the home to the offices of the All Year Round, and which today houses on the ground floor the Charles Dickens Coffee House. You're standing in front of the Charles Dickens Coffee House. This was the house from which Dickens published his popular magazine entitled All the Year Round. The magazine became so popular that crowds would gather out here in the street where we're standing, waiting for the next editions. Dickens lodged in the rooms above his editorial premises in the late 1860s for a few years before he died. He would stay here while visiting London to do his public readings. Let's continue down along Wellington Street until we reach the Strand. We'll turn left and cross the Aldwych using the traffic lights. Keep on the left side of the road and continue along the Strand. You will see St. Mary le Strand Church in the center of the road. It was in this very church that Dickens' parents were married in 1809. At that time, John Dickens worked as a clerk over the road in Somerset House, which today houses the Courtauld Gallery. Exit the church and turn left, and we'll cross the Strand to Somerset House using the traffic lights. We'll turn left on the other side and continue along until we pass King's College London University. Let's turn in the first right into Surrey Street and continue along the right-hand side. We'll walk for another 100 meters before we turn right into Surrey Steps, which is a red and white brick archway on the right. Dickens often visited this bath as a young boy, as does David Copperfield. Dickens wrote,
"And there was an old Roman bath in those days at the bottom of one of the streets out of the Strand. It may still be there, in which I have had many a cold plunge."
Turn right and we'll walk along to St. Clement Danes Church, which is further along on the left-hand side. Cross the Strand at the traffic lights to get to the church. The church you see today was built by Christopher Wren in 1682. Mrs. Lirriper was married here in the Christmas stories. This church is associated with the nursery rhyme Oranges and Lemons. The bells can be heard chiming this tune on the hour at 9 a.m., 12 noon, 3 p.m., and 6 p.m., and have done so for over 3 centuries. St. Clement Danes is the central church of the Royal Air Force and houses books of remembrance for all the RAF, American, and other Allied Air Force personnel killed in action while stationed in the United Kingdom during World War II. Exit from the church and we're going to go right, crossing the Strand using the traffic lights. We'll turn left on the other side and walk up the Aldwych, following its curving street past the post office. Continue and turn on the second right into Kingsway, and continue along Kingsway on the right-hand side of the road to the first right turn into Portugal Street. Then we'll continue on the left and turn first left into Sheffield Street, continuing still further along until directly ahead we see the Old Curiosity Shop. This picturesque little house was built in 1567 and is thought to be one of the oldest shops in London. In Dickens' time, the shop was owned by a Mr. Tessieman, who was an acquaintance of Dickens. Whether or not this is the actual shop that Dickens based his novel, The Old Curiosity Shop, around, we will never know. Dickens is said to have known the building and had visited a bookbinder there. Let's walk past the Old Curiosity Shop. We'll walk approximately 20 meters further to the end of Portsmouth Street. Cross the road ahead and continue ahead into Lincoln's Inn Fields. Approximately halfway along on your left is number 58 Lincoln's Inn Fields, which was John Forster's house. This house belonged to John Forster, who was a well-known lawyer and one of Dickens' closest friends. Also, in 1874, Forster produced a biography of Dickens. Dickens used John Forster's house as the model for Bleak House and home to Mr. Tulkinghorn. In Bleak House, Dickens described the house as a large house, formerly a house of state, and in those shrunken fragments of greatness, lawyers lie like maggots in nuts. Dickens gave his first private reading of The Chimes in the front upstairs rooms here. Today the house is private and closed to the public. Let's return along Lincoln's Inn Fields to where we first entered. Keep the park on your left, turn left, and continue anti-clockwise around the park, passing the Royal College of Surgeons on the right. Turn left down Searle Street. Turn left at the very end. Notice the Royal Courts of Justice opposite. And let's enter Carey Street. Several Dickensian period dramas have been filmed in this street. If you look to the left, you'll notice Wildey and Sons, a legal booksellers established here in 1830. Walk to the end of Carey Street, which leads to Chancery Lane, and stop. Much of the action in Dickens' Bleak House is set around Chancery Lane. In Bleak House, Tom Jarndyce visited a coffee house on Chancery Lane and, in despair, blew his brains out. On Dickens' first day working as a solicitor's clerk at Gray's Inn in 1827, he decided to go for lunch in Chancery Lane wearing a new cap. He was approached by a big blackguard fellow who doffed my cap and said,
"Hello, soldier,"
which I could not stand, so I at once struck him and then he hit me in the eye. Turn right and we'll continue down to the end of Chancery Lane to Fleet Street. Dickens knew Fleet Street intimately. Like David Copperfield, he used to frequent it when he had no money to look in the food shops. On the opposite side of the road, there's a historic black and white timber building, which is Prince Henry's Room. Prince Henry's Room is a beautiful building. Dating from 1610, it's one of the few that survived the Great Fire of London that occurred in 1666. Originally an inn, it later became Mrs. Salmon's Waxworks and early Madame Tussaud's, which was one of Dickens' favorite places to visit when he was a young man. In David Copperfield, David takes Peggotty to see some perspiring waxworks in Fleet Street and makes fun of the sweating figures. We'll cross Fleet Street using the traffic lights and turn right when we get to the other side and cross Chancery Lane and continue 30 meters along Fleet Street, keeping on the left. Turn first left into a very narrow alley called Clifford's Inn Passage. Walk to the end of the passage to Clifford's Inn Gatehouse. Clifford's Inn Gatehouse was built in the early 17th century and is all that remains of a much older inn that was established back in 1345 and was used as a college for student lawyers. In Dickens' novel Little Dorrit, Tip, who was working here as a clerk, found a stool and 12 shillings in the office of Clifford's Inn. Dickens himself must have frequently walked along these narrow passages, as he would often use descriptions, not always complimentary, of Clifford's Inn. In his novel Our Mutual Friend, he says,
"I think it's called Clifford's Inn, where we can hear one another better in the roaring streets."
Mr. Boffin then glanced into the moldy little plantation, or cat preserve, of Clifford's Inn as it was that day. Virginia Woolf also lived here between 1912 and 1913. Return to Fleet Street and we'll turn left and go 2 doors down to St. Dunstan in the West Church. St. Dunstan in the West Church was the very first church in London to have a clock with minute hands marked on its dial. The present clock is the original and dates from 1671. The 2 figures on either side of the clock formally strike the bell every 15 minutes and are the legendary giants Gog and Magog. It was their chiming that awakened Scrooge in A Christmas Carol. In David Copperfield, David and his aunt stop outside Harrison's toy shop, which was on the opposite side of the road at number 34. It's been rebuilt since, to see the giants strike the bells at noon. Dickens dedicated his Christmas story called The Chimes to the Church of St. Dunstan. A little bit further along, directly after the shop indicated as number 167 Fleet Street, and on your left, under an arch, is Johnson's Court. The monthly magazine had its offices at number 166 Fleet Street. Into its letterbox in the side door in Johnson's Court, Dickens stealthily one evening at twilight and with fear and trembling delivered his first submitted story in a dark letterbox in a dark office up a dark court in Fleet Street. It was here that Dickens' career as a writer started. Notice a sign for Dr. Johnson's house. Dr. Johnson wrote the first English dictionary, which included etymologies and examples of uses in 1755 in this large Georgian house. He compiled the dictionary in the attic along with 6 clerks who worked mostly standing up. The house is dedicated to his memory and his work. Exit Johnson's Court and turn left back into Fleet Street. Continue along approximately 60 meters and turn left into Wine Office Court. Immediately on the right is Ye Old Cheshire Cheese Public House. This pub was one of Dickens' favorite pubs, and it's also one of the oldest in London. Downstairs, it's still possible to see the charred wooden beams from the original pub. The pub has a strong literary legacy. Samuel Johnson was a regular here and is supposed to haunt the pub. During the 1890s, the pub was home to the Rhymers Club, whose members included Yeats and Oscar Wilde. Dickens is supposed to have preferred to sit at the table to the right of the fireplace in the ground floor room opposite the bar. As you exit the Cheshire Cheese Pub into Fleet Street, turn left and turn your first left into Shoe Lane. Continue up Shoe Lane on the left to the junction. We'll cross the road and continue directly ahead up Shoe Lane, which becomes St. Andrew's Street. Continue to the end and stop at Holborn Circus. To the right is St. Andrew's Church. This church was in Oliver Twist. In that book, on their way to Hyde Park Corner, Bill Sikes and Oliver pass the church. They look up at the clock of St. Andrew's, which was hard upon 7. Benjamin Disraeli, despite his Jewish background, was baptized in this Wren Church in 1817. Just across and opposite from the church is the Holborn Viaduct. In Dickens' time, this area was called Holborn Hill. It comprised a squalid mass of slum housing with a maze of dirty alleys and passageways. It was known for severe poverty and crime. Dickens refers to this area in Oliver Twist as where drunken men and women were positively wallowing in filth. Fagin and his gang of young thieves lived here when Oliver Twist was introduced to them. Behind today's Holborn Viaduct is Saffron Hill, which was a notorious criminal district. The Three Cripples Inn, a pub patronized by Fagin and his associates, stood here until it was demolished along with all of the slum housing. And our tour ends here. Thank you for joining us today. This is Michelle saying thank you for joining me on this tour. Goodbye.